Whether your team is your family, your business, or your employees, staying connected is crucial. You can depend on the Cross Insurance family
Very good.
to provide the best insurance solutions for you. We've got your team protected. Visit crossagency.com today.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Boston Globe Black History Month Film Festival. We are so excited to be here with you all today. Happy Black History Month. The film festival will be going on all month long, and we're also teaming up with Roxbury Film Festival to celebrate 25 years of Rox Film Fest. And today we're discussing not just Embrace, we're actually discussing the intersection of art and justice and how important it is that we do that work. And today with us, I am so lucky to have Makiba McCreary, one of my favorite humans, and president of the New Commonwealth Fund. Hi, Makiba.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We also have the young legend, Amari Parrish Jeffries, Executive Director of Embrace Boston, doing the good people's work. And last but never least, Che Anderson, appointed by former Governor Baker to the Mass Cultural Council and mover and shaker of many things, holding lots of space for artists across the nation, creating opportunities for artists to be represented, whether we're talking about Basel or Dubai or anywhere in between. He's always kind of representing for arts. So let's get into it. Happy Black History Month to each of you. We're going to start with what we all are embracing, since our audience has seen the documentary, and that's the big arts news in Boston right now. Let's talk about what each of us want to embrace. Let's start with you, Makiba.
Well, first, thank you, Janae, for always making sure that really important conversations are being had with transparency and open to as many folks as possible to contribute. I, in particular, post the incredible unveiling of the Embrace, and congratulations, Amari, on such a incredible contribution to the city, but also to this country. The reminder that if we didn't have people willing to be vulnerable and to create on our behalves and in full sort of view, we would miss out on so many stories and so many opportunities for us to dig a little bit deeper and think about what it reminds us of, what that visual or what that shape or what that image tickles for us in terms of our own experience and what it leads us to wonder about moving forward. And that is the beautiful thing about everybody having the opportunity to intersect with an object of art in whatever way their spirit compels them to do. So I am embracing that right now.
Che?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for that introduction. I really got to have you introduce me and everything. And I'm super excited to be holding space with so many people that I just look up to and think do amazing work. Personally, I think right now I'm in the spirit of embracing diversity, but I don't mean that in the sense of ethnic or racial diversity necessarily. I think that should be embraced and that should just be a point everyone should acknowledge. But I think that I want to embrace diversity of thought and a belief. And, you know, I think that quite often people look at particularly Black folk, but many marginalized populations as a monolithic group, that we all have the same exact experience and same ideologies and same upbringings. And while many of us may have some similar paths that we followed, we are also individuals and have to be honored as such. And so when I look at a piece of artwork, like what we all witnessed with the Embrace, I love that it sparks so much conversation. And I think that that's the beauty of embracing the diversity of thought that we all have and experience. And so that's something that I'm currently sitting with at this moment.
And Mari?
Yeah, thank you, Janae. Thank you for the introduction as always. And anytime I get to spend time with you and Makiba and Che, there's always going to be a good day, a good start of the week. And so I really appreciate being here, and the rest of the folks tuning in and watching this later. I think part of what I'm embracing is the love, right? And the Embrace as a memorial is one of the first memorials dedicated unapologetically to love, to social justice, to Black people in Boston, in one of our oldest public parks. And so the essence of love is one of the things I've been embracing, and trying to see the love in all sorts of ways that people express it. And sometimes that love is tough, and sometimes that love is love, and it's refreshing and it's joyful. And so each and every moment I'm trying to embrace the love in our everyday lives.
Well, I've been embracing the beauty. I've been thinking a lot about W.E.B. Du Bois and what he said about beauty. What has this beauty to do with the world? What has beauty to do with truth and goodness, with the facts of the world and the right actions of men? Nothing, artists rush to answer. They may be right. I am but a humble disciple of art and cannot presume to say. I am one who tells the truth and exposes evil and seeks with beauty and for beauty to set the world right. That somehow, somewhere, eternal and perfect beauty sits above truth and right I can conceive. But here and now, in the world in which I work, they are for me unseparated and inseparable. Mm. And I love that because it seats beauty at the table with justice. And I think when I think about Frederick Douglass and how he used portraiture, and we can just draw that all into Gordon Parks, to Jamel Shabazz, to Carrie Mae Weems, to Deb Willis, and so on and so on. The use of art of all kind, if we were talking about Harry Belafonte or Mahalia Jackson and Nina Simone, it's like arts have always been used as a radical tool of justice. In the positioning of beauty and who gets to define it and who gets to say what it looks like and how it feels is really an exercise in justice when you think about the corrective work of how our people and other marginalized folks have been depicted or stripped of beauty. Che, what would you say about that, about the use of art as a beautiful tool of the revolution?
Ooh. I mean, I think that art can I think art often serves as a front line of resistance. I think we see that globally when there are conversations to be had, when there are wars, both physical, psychological, mental, that are fought. I think that quite often you see artists stepping forward. I mean, right behind Amari, you have a great example, I think, of when people take and leverage artwork and find ways to have it speak to, with, and for community. And I think, there's this James Baldwin quote that I'm going to completely massacre, and I'm sure you know about Heart Janae, so I'm kind of leading to you on it. But he had this quote about the world being before you, and like you have no obligation to leave it as it was when you entered it, right? And I think that in some ways the ethos of so many artists, right? To step into a space, to experience it, to try to understand as best you can from your point of view, and then to try to find ways to make it a little different, a little better than it was when you walked into it. And I think that has a lot to do with the way in which artists respond to resistance.
Imari, a lot of times, it's not even a lot of times, it's standard in American culture to use art to celebrate war. And we're like, oh, these heroes, but it's almost always, these war heroes, oftentimes oppressors, so many times rooted in violence. And then when you think about times of war, not just, I'm talking like way back, one of the first things people do when they colonize and oppress other people is burn their art or appropriate it. So it becomes very clear how powerful art can be when a colonizer's goal is to first strip you of the agency you had in telling your own story. I know that lots of people were involved in Embrace, but can you talk about what it's been like to be at the helm of this conversation in creating such a monumental, large piece of art that goes against every narrative we've been told about ourselves, and also the Freedom Rally, like the plaza around it with all the names and how important it is to name?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. There's three ways in which culture is transferred, symbolically, objectively, and culturally. And so three forms of capital: cultural, symbolic, and objectified. And so public art is a form of both symbolic and objectified capital. And so that objectified and symbolic capital functions as they function like analog cookies. And so, when you want to go and buy a coat or a pair of shoes online, and you accept the cookies, and then every day or throughout the day you get ads for cookies where it says, you want to buy these shoes, you want to buy these shoes, you want to buy these shoes, and at the end of the day you end up buying the shoes because your computer is telling you, because you accepted the cookies, that you really want to buy shoes. You weren't really sure you did, but at the end of the day, you want to buy those shoes, you end up buying those shoes. And so public art does the same. It's a form of symbolic and objectified capital. And so when that art is burnt from one culture conquering another, or that art or new art is placed, it's a way to place cookies in that society that tells them who's in charge, who's not in charge, who's the winners, who's the losers, what are our values, what do we hold true. And it forms like cookies, and you start believing it. And I think in many cases, even us, even as people of color, we start believing those analog cookies, because we see those monuments and symbols telling us that we are less than, telling us that we are objectified, telling us that we are inhuman. And so in the past few weeks, in the city where Dr. King was assassinated, marching and I Am a Man marches, right, for sanitation workers, and some of those officers might have been the descendants and offspring of those, or their grandfathers or grandparents could have been marching with King with I Am a Man shirt. They dehumanize a man, right? They dehumanize a Black person. And so that's the way that public art works, and the way that it kind of socializes people into the ways of being. And so I think being at this helm and being able to create that, there was a lot of intention of placing this in one of America's first displaced Black communities. And so we wanted to place it in this Black community, this displaced Black community, to symbolize and to hold ground for the communities and family members who no longer live there, who have lost their homes through displacement and gentrification, and all the ways in which Black communities were marginalized and pushed out and pushed back. And so that was important to us. I think the plaza was important to us. The 1965 Freedom Rally honored 65 other heroes, but the pattern harkened to the Black quilting tradition, where the quilts were one of the few things that enslaved people could pass on from one generation to another. It was a communal process of building these quilts from different textiles. And so the pattern harkens to that. And Boston was one of the final stops of the Underground Railroad. And so those quilts also told messages. They were maps. And so the way that the names are assigned on the, maybe I'm telling a story people will go out and should see for themselves. The way that the names are assigned on the plaza, it is actually a map. 12th Baptist Church, Charles Street AME, they were in Beacon Hill, right? 12th Baptist was known as the Fugitive Slave Church. And so there's a map embedded within the way that the names are placed on the plaza that will take you somewhere. And so they're not there randomly. I think the other thing about the plaza, when you go there at night, it looks like stars. And so those stars are to light the way to the map to take you home. And so there's these stories embedded within the Embrace. So the Embrace, of course, honors the Kings, and we all know Hank's work and why that piece of art was chosen. But the plaza, which memorialized 65 Bostonians, and the way that the plaza was designed was also something of note. The 4 of the 5 founders of the Embrace are Black. Embrace Boston is run by a Black person, is a Black organization. The artist is Black, and the 2 architects are Black. And so almost in every aspect of this piece, Blackness was centered in it. And so I think that was one of the things that was missing in the discourse when we thought about the Embrace, or when people saw the Embrace, thinking that this was not something that signified and celebrated Black culture in Boston.
Thank you. I'm really happy we got to talk about the naming and the plaza, because I feel like so much of the backlash overshadowed what it looked like to hold space and embrace not just one hero or two heroes, but the many heroes that get overshadowed and hidden all the time. And when we talk about Black agency and why it matters, I really want to pull you in here, Makiba, with your experience at the MFA, with your experience in our culture, of our culture, and also with what you guys just did at the New Commonwealth Fund, which pouring money into artists and making sure people know that's part of the equity and racial justice work. Like, that's literally one of the tenets, like the artist plays a big role in justice work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I'm glad you let me open the door to the museum, because I was going to qualify that I have to share something about things I learned there, but I'm not, not doing the plug, although there's an exhibition coming up that I want to tell you about. But the New Commonwealth Fund, when I joined, it had 4 pillars: economic empowerment, youth development, criminal justice reform, and health equity. And the board agreed to let me add a 5th pillar, which we call identity and culture narrative. And if you're curious what that means, you look at the 2 images behind Amari and it helps you make that connection. There's an image behind me. There's the manifestation of stories that we get to take the power back and own. And then we decide what that visual representation or oral representation or physical representation looks like. So it's not arts and culture, because we really want to highlight that creatives come in all sorts of modalities, and the value that the institutions place on certain modalities over others is something we really want to make sure we don't reinforce. So to that end, we made an agreement that we would make a $250,000 commitment to unrestricted operating dollars for creatives, and we were able to launch that at the museum. It was a sweet moment for me. The Obama portraits were there, and you all joined me for an incredible conversation, a tough conversation about identity and who controls that story. There's going to be an exhibition at the museum that I got the privilege of being on the very, very front end of, that's traveling from a few different places. We'll be at the Met first, coming to the MFA, and everybody should mark their calendars, or I'd have to check and see when it's coming, but it's about Dave the Potter, David Drake. And this man was born in 1801, right around there. He was a slave in South Carolina, and he created pottery that ended up being a commodity for this white man who was his slave owner. And they had it was a huge amount of commerce, and it really put Edgefield on the map. And the beautiful part of this is that this man learned how to read and write, and he would inscribe little missives on some of his pottery, which held fat and vegetables and meats and those kinds of things. These are serious pieces of earthware. He would sort of make fun, right? He would have clapbacks basically to the white folks that were enslaving him and his family and his people. He would tell stories of their history. He would, there were signals to their stolen religion and their faith. And to this day, people go to Edgefield to find the pottery that came out of this ceramics factory, if you would. And it's a bit of an irony, right? That a Black man who's a slave found a way to make sure that his voice remained present, and even actually denied the power that the white folks were thinking they were taking by turning this into a way to make a living, to earn a living. And so I've had the privilege of actually touching and feeling. There's a collector who invited me to stick my hand inside of one of them in his home. And I have to tell you, the electricity, you feel your ancestors, you feel their presence. in what they've created. And so if that's true for a mound of clay, that must be true for anything else that comes out of us. And that speaks to sort of what we want the world to know about who we are.
It's true for like the beauty in it and the pain in it. I remember taking Sarah Lewis's Vision and Justice class and at Harvard and holding like a daguerreotype and just the devastation and almost the need to run out of there, to hurry up and like, you know, return it, take my gloves off and just get into fresh air because of the mounting pain of Renty, and then just thinking about how Agassi's name is just everywhere all the time, and we're having to, you know, be forced to celebrate that. Also the show that Makiba just referenced is Hear Me Now, and it's March 4th through July 23rd at the MFA. So you guys can't see the link, but we always send an email out to registered guest of the film festival, and that email will also have that link in it and a reminder to catch the show. But where I was going next, which was talking about Sarah Lewis and her class, Vision and Justice, and how that class really talks about visual literacy and the things we need to be taught to see. And some of it speaks to what Amari was saying about cookies and how we kind of ingest a diet of lies and illusions about who we are and how we define ourselves, because this country has so defined Black folks. But part of it is like how we see ourselves and all that internalized anti-Blackness and internalized racism. And I've just been thinking a lot about what she says about learning to see and what that means. What does it mean to you to actually see art, to witness beauty? When I think about the backlash around Embrace, I don't really care if people dislike it. That's how art, you like it or, you know, it's just art is not always going to be well received. But there's a lot of things happening with the photos, the way they're photographed, the way people are choosing to see that goes straight to like the most negative or like hypersexual exploitive vision versus readily recognizing love or beauty or space holding. So what does it mean to you to have a visual literacy? Che, you want to start?
You starting me with these hard questions. I know. Like so.
And we appreciate you, Che.
No, you know, it's as a person who gets to work with creatives, and I'm really excited I get to work with so many different diverse creatives. One thing I've recognized is that I don't always like the work they produce, and I think that that's a tough thing to come to terms with when you work with people who are artists. But that's only one layer of what art or creativity is supposed to do. Right, it may be something you like, something you don't like, but really what it's supposed to do is, in my opinion, particularly in public space, it either holds space for storytelling, right? The story of people, telling stories with people, or for people who don't have the platform to tell their own story or narrative, or it creates conversation, right? And so when I think about the Embrace piece, particularly, I'm like, it checked both those boxes, like very, very strongly. And I think that, you know, one of the things you realize too is that when it comes to public art, there was a time where you would put art somewhere and the conversation with it was very localized, right? Only the people who live in that area or would transverse that space would get to see it. Now we live in a time where most people who are going to experience the work in some capacity are going to see it through a digital platform. It's going to be seen through a photo or multiple photos, right? And that's a really interesting thing when you are a creative person. How do you make it something for people who are going to be able to see it, touch it, have that sort of ephemeral relationship with it, and those who are going to be thousands of miles away, who may never experience this in person? And I think that that's where that language piece comes in, right? Not to belabor the point, but there's this thing within graffiti culture for people who can read graffiti. Not everyone can do it. Some people just look at it and it's like, this looks like colors. But there are people who, no matter how wild the style of artwork comes out, they can read the name or the letters that are there. It's a talent. It's a capacity building thing. And I would implore anyone who's watching this or listening to try to develop that part of themselves. Bless you. Bless you again. And to develop that capacity with which they're able to look at something outside of themselves to try to firmly grasp what it's actually about, right? And that works well for sculpture, for graffiti. Big shout to Wild Style. I think that that's part of capacity building of being a full human being, is your ability to embrace, no pun intended, the art realm and see it for whatever it needs to be in that moment for you or for those that you're holding space with.
So I'm glad you brought up graffiti culture. Also, Che played he won't ever be loud about it, but he definitely played a quiet role in making sure that Rob Pro Black Gibbs gave us that gorgeous Breathe Life piece over at the Greenway. And I'm giving that shout out because I'm about to actually quote Rob. Rob wanted to be with us today, but he could not because, you know, even the good brother Pro Black has to do jury duty. So, but I interviewed him a long time ago for a Globe magazine cover story, and something he said that he still says often sticks to me. And it was, you know, I want people to feel smart when they look at my work. People move from Boston and they shame the city. But everywhere I've been, I put down the Boston flag. I'm from Boston. I'm from Black Boston. I'm from Roxbury. It's about opening these doors and having these conversations. The name Pro Black isn't even mine anymore. It's all of ours. And I think about what that means to, when we talk about graffiti culture, but also just when we talk about art, you know, a lot of times artists, you're right, Che, like it's supposed to hold space. There's a message, but then there's like art that is very much intentionally meant to make us feel a way. Like, you know, Pro Black always wants to make us feel loved and seen and witnessed. But I sometimes think if you don't already love yourself or you haven't been taught to love yourself and see yourself, it's hard for you to ever receive that message. And Mara, you had recently said something to me about that, if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, you know, I think some of that was some of the reactions to the Embrace. You know, there's 740 memorials built for Confederate generals, right? And so part of those memorials have socialized people to a new narrative, this lost cause narrative. 740 memorials built on hate, right? And so hate for people that look like us, the four of us, and some of the folks tuning in. Not that many memorials built on love. And so if you've ever gone to the Embrace, you know it's a sacred place. It's in the middle of the city, but somehow it's quiet. It's become a sanctuary. It's about love. And I think sometimes, you know, when you joke around with people, you're like, oh, I love you, man. And people get all comfortable, or they change the subject, or you say, oh, Makiba, I like that sweater. And she's like, oh, you know, whatever. Right. And we do it. And it's part of our culture. Right. And we joke about it. It's like, oh, I'm trying to be like you, Janae. Nah, I'm trying to be like you. Like, look at you with the yellow on the collar. I'm trying to be like, you know, and that's a little bit part of it, right? Because it's part of our cultural norm where we're so uncomfortable with someone giving us compliments. Our response is, no, I'm trying to be like you. Like, and it goes back and forth. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And that's a little bit of how we've socialized, you know, this being loved on and not just, you know, receiving love. And it's in a small way, and we've seen memes about it, and we all do it, and it's part of our cultural norm. But it's rooted in this kind of discomfort with being cared for and being in joy and being in relationship with people who admire you and want to tell you that. Personally. And I think that's some of the things that we're in Makiba's work and Che's work and your work. I think that's some of the things that we're all trying to work to change, where, you know, of course, you know, I want to be like all of y'all, but I should just also receive that love that you're giving me too.
Kiva, you said something earlier, and also, I love you, Amari. You said something earlier that I want to go back to about the importance of recognizing creatives more expansively. And because I've been engaging with so much of Dr. King's work lately, I've been running across the phrasing creative tension a lot. Because for all our narratives around the Kings, it's always like peaceful protest and kind to everybody, but he was a radical. The Kings were radical. Both of them were very radical. And they became radicalized here in Boston. And well, actually, Coretta was radicalized before, but she helped radicalize Dr. King. But what I want to say is, you know, I think it was very intentional, the same way colonizers destroy people's art and give them a new narrative. I think it was very intentional, the way that we've seen, you know, color photographs of the Kings made black and white to make it seem like it was so long ago, the way it's like, oh, he was the peaceful, gentle Christian protester, when in fact, the phrasing he always used was direct, nonviolent action as a aim to build creative tension. And everything he did was with purpose to kind of use these methods that had not been used before to creatively figure out ways of protest that would force oppressors and racists to have to come to the table and negotiate. It was very creative. And the NAACP, if we go back to Jim Crow and lynching, the use of "a man was lynched today" out in front of the offices, the use of "I am a man" for the sanitation workers protests, like, we've always known the power of creativity and how we can use that in ways that span beyond physical, tangible art. We can use it in the way we move, the way we strategize. And the Kings were very smart about that. They were smart about what direct, nonviolent action looked like in creative ways, what creative tension feels like, what it meant to collaborate with Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier and these other types of artists to help build the protests. But Makiba, because your work is very much not solely about this, but one of the tenets is about this, I wanted to get a little bit more into that, about how we can all wake up that kind of creative magic within ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, you should know that, Janae, when I think of creative, like, you pop right up there on the top of my list. So does Dr. King, in his ability to orate and call people to action with his words and with his breath, with his energy that he puts behind those words. And this is my belief, and you know, this is perhaps not what everybody shares with me, but I truly believe that the reason that art in its most generalized sense is so powerful is because it allows each of us a path in. And this, you know, tags onto what Che was talking about, with this idea of like, build your competence. Like, it's actually already in you. And so if you can find your way into like this right here, or it makes you like a gut punch, you know, like you say, oh, whether it's because you are, you know, struggling with something that makes you uncomfortable, or because it makes you sentimental, or it makes you belly laugh, like, those are all equally really powerful ways for us to remember that we are human beings. And I remember when, as we all do, unfortunately, Mr. Floyd was murdered, and we got all these calls from our white allies, our white colleagues, our, you know, a lot of white moms saying, you know, oh my gosh, I can't imagine how you're feeling right now. What can I do? And I've probably said this a number of times, but I'm going to keep saying it, like, raise your child to understand that they are a human being. Like, and if you can really do that, then that means that we have people walking around that understand that their humanity is no better or more powerful than the person next to them. As a matter of fact, it's just as powerful and just as incredible and good as the person next to them. That, I think, is something that this next generation, like my son's generation, I feel like they're going to require more of that from the world than we did, and maybe from, you know, our parents and grandparents. I feel like we're getting somewhere. I'm going to have to be hopeful, because I want my son to, you know, live in a beautiful world and thrive. and not have to worry about fear of his body being taken from him or his spirit because he's a Black man. So I know that they are asking more of each other. And that's the thing that I think we need to keep requiring of ourselves and of our white allies, right? Require more, because the outcome is really just going to take you to a better place.
Thank you. And we had an audience question that I was going to get to anyways, but so I'm going to go ahead and raise it now. Tamala had asked, she said, basically, sometimes we get stuck and pass by street names and statues and symbols that we forget what's needed to repair our community. And, you know, what's actually needed to repair our community from all the oppression, and we don't get the necessary support, which is true. This conversation is definitely about talking about the intersection of art and justice, which is why we're centering art here today. But all of us recognize that those needs go beyond that. And Amari, I want you to talk, because something else that got lost in the Embrace conversation, because I saw a number of people, Black and otherwise, saying things like, all this money could have gone, you know, to X, Y, and Z. Amari, can you talk about the Embrace Center and a lot of the economic initiatives coming out of Embrace Boston?
Yeah, I'll piggyback to that first part of the question. You know, I think what we know now, and I think in a more rigorous way than we understood in the past, is that art, particularly public art, impacts the milieu of a place, right? It is like eating fresh fruits and vegetables, working out 4 times a week, getting enough sleep, drinking all the water, and then living next to a nuclear or a toxic waste dump. That's what that art does. You could be doing all the right things, but there is something in the background, something in the milieu that is still impacting your health, particularly public art and to a certain extent private art, right? And so when you go to see what we refer to as fine art, and you see these images of war, and you see these regal pictures of generals conquering people, and you know the famous photos or paintings of hunters chasing a wolf, right? Like or a fox, right? These images that you see in fine art shape what you think is important, what you think is not important. And so again, they act in the milieu, and I think we are attacking and really focusing on art as a racial equity issue, because we understand how it is just as powerful as policy change, just as powerful as getting our direct needs met. And I think they are, you know, on par with that. I think one of the conversations, I think to what you said, Janae, people were talking about spending the money on creating this piece of public art. And well, you know, 2 things I'll say about that before I get into the work. You know, in 2020, we were talking about essential workers and you know, these hidden figures, and the money that was spent to build the Embrace did not make the artist or anyone involved in this process wealthy. It went to pay truck drivers and stonemasons and welders and the guys who crush sand up, and the guys who are folks who you know, drive construction rigs, and artists in order to create the Embrace. And so we ended up, you know, providing jobs and subsidizing artists through the process of the Embrace. And that was important for us, especially when we're talking about essential workers. These people were not working during the dark ages of the pandemic, and we were able to, through our fundraising, support a whole ecosystem of art and construction professionals in the process. But we understand that, you know, art alone can't do it by itself. And there were 7 harms of racism, 7 harms of slavery for people of color, for Black people. The first is culture, symbols, and personhood. The other ones are criminal justice, transportation, education, housing, and wealth. And so 7 harms of racism, 7 harms of slavery. And so Embrace Boston exists to tackle those 7 harms, and building a monument creating a festival to stand up another monument Juneteenth.
Okay, Amari is frozen.
Can
Makiba, do
I-
you
Yeah,
talk
you know,
about the
while
work
we-
you're doing at the
we
new?
wait
Yes.
for him to come back, I wanted to just answer one of the questions that you asked him also around, like, so the idea of, or I think it was the question of, which I hear all the time. Why would you spend this much money on something here when it could have gone somewhere else? And I just want to remind us that this is an incredibly wealthy Commonwealth. There are 21 billionaires that are in this Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There's, more than $78 billion represented by the philanthropic giving potential in this Commonwealth. So this is the thing that frustrates me, because this came up when I was in the public school system as well. Everybody starts to feel like there's only 8 pieces in the pie. And if they don't get one of those slices, it's all done. It's all over. But the reality is folks worked really hard. They made a very public commitment to making sure that a lot of folks were involved, a lot of public folks. There was a process where people weighed in and decided that this was the image that they wanted to see on that common. And then they committed to writing the checks. Nobody's arm was bent behind their back and they were told, if you don't write us a check for this, then we're going to kick you out of the Commonwealth. People did this of their own free will and volition. And so if we want to make sure that dollars are flowing to Black communities and brown communities and creatives and entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders in other ways, don't worry, it's out there. Like, you got to ask too. You got to find a way to rally to get that generosity to flow in a different direction. It's not an either or. That's what I want to say.
No, it's not an either or. Like, I feel like all of these tools are necessary. Like, art does play a big role in how it's like I said, I mean, there's a reason why they destroy your art when they take your people. So it's like, we cannot underestimate its importance. And all of us here know that economic justice is also important. And we have to, a lot is happening, particularly in Boston and across the country right now with, the cost of housing and all these things. But can you take a moment here to share a little bit more about the work you guys are doing at the New Commonwealth Fund? And then Shay, I just want to go ahead and line you up because I know we're getting close to end of time, but I'd like for you to talk a little bit about your other work, because you do a lot of work within the medical community, talking about, inequities and addressing those things. All right, Kibi.
Thrilled to share that the New Commonwealth Fund is coming into its 3rd birthday this spring, and the founders whose shoulders I stand on, they are 19 Black C-suite executives who raised $20 million in the first year. By the 2nd year, there was another $20 million. When I just finished my first year out, we were at 40 million. But the more important thing is that the dollars moved right out the door to be reinvested in Black and brown nonprofit leaders across the Commonwealth. And some also allies who are doing really important work to support Black and brown leadership across this Commonwealth. And I should include that. And as I said earlier, it's across 5 different areas. I'm going to say them again, and then I'm going to say one last thing. So health equity, economic empowerment, youth development, criminal justice reform, and identity culture narratives. None of those exist, especially for Black people, in a vacuum. They are all intrinsically linked, at least 2 or 3 of them. And so what we find is that folks who are doing work in the food justice space are also absolutely impacting, economic empowerment, are working with young people, folks who are doing health equity work on Blue Hill Ave, that started in the pandemic, but that has not gone away because they're still in need. They are teaching folks to be empowered to walk in and require that their medical care be accessible, that the language not be opaque, that they be able to bring somebody with them to be able to ask the tough questions when they get intimidated by this medical profession. So all of these things are happening. There's incredible work taking place in the city, but also in all of the cities around us, Worcester, out where Che is, Lawrence, some incredible folks doing really powerful work to lift up each other and make sure that we come out of this spin and that we really acknowledge how many gifts and how many positive capacities there are in our communities, not just this conversation constantly about the deficits that we're facing.
Thank you. Che, can you, again, speak to what you're doing now, but I also want to press rewind a little bit and speak to the work you did in helping bring so many murals by so many artists of color or featuring, you know, people of color on big walls. And having lived in Worcester all these years, you've been able to firsthand see what a difference it made in the community and in conversations that were able to happen. So can you speak to that and then also draw the through line from that to what you're doing now, having equity conversations at UMass?
Yeah, I mean, to start with the public art part, you know, I think that quite often people look at that project of what was able to be done with Powell Worcester, now Worcester Walls, and they see it as a great way to bring color to a community. And that again, that's great, but you have to start peeling back that onion, so to speak, right? What that project does is it allows for representation on large scale spaces for people, right? Particularly in a public art space, it provides access for people who may not be able to afford certain institutions or just may find them daunting to be within. So it presents opportunities for cultural exchange, cultural capacity building in a space that they may just generally transverse. Right, having more feet on the street tends to lead to a different feeling around public safety, right? Having more feet on the street and items that people care about tends to allow for local government and other people who are officials to pay more attention to certain blighted areas, right? So like, if you look at it as just like a mural project, okay, fine. Thank you for appreciating that. Hope you got a great photo for your social media, did a cute little TikTok dance in front of it. But when you dive deeper, you find that there's so many other pieces and components to it that make it really about collaborative community building. Right. And so to have that opportunity and to expand it in Worcester, it was amazing because we're a gateway city. We have so many people who are, you know, first generation or are new immigrants or new Americans, or that try to figure out ways to find and hold space in their new home. And when you come into a place that's a new home and there's an artist who represents you, your culture, your background, it does something to those people, right? And candidly, when you're a marginalized population of people and you find that going up in your space, that also does something different. To see work from people like, you know, Max Ansting or Sidney James, who are Black artists, and to have them in your place, that does something for young people, let alone everybody else, right? And so to be able to do that in Worcester and see it grow, and candidly to be able to have, you know, pieces of other projects like in Detroit with Blackout Walls, which folks should look out into because that's an amazing initiative of Black and brown artists coming together and uplifting. And to be able to your point earlier, go to a place like Doha, Qatar, and see a large portrait of a Black boy out there does something again for people who may not have experienced that culture. And candidly, the reason why I think it flows so sort of seamlessly into my what I call my day job, so to speak now, my health insurance at UMass Chan Medical School, is that is a social determinant of health, right? Your ability to see yourself in your community, right? Your capacity for feeling as though the community cares about you, your city's investing in you, is a determinant of health. I'm gonna give a loose quote from the brother Michael Curry, who big shout to him because he does some amazing things. He and I talked about the fact that when you look at so many populations, marginalized populations, I grew up in public housing, so did he. Quite often people get sick and they go to a health center and then they're sent back into the same situation that just made them sick, right? Because of things like food deserts and food insecurity, because of lack of educational resources, because of an inability to find the way to reach out to the different resources that are available to them because of lack of information. And so it's difficult to see that progress come quite often because people just don't have the resources made readily available. And so to be in a position at the med school where I can go out into the community and speak with folks and speak with government officials and find ways for us to address gaps within communities, particularly those that are marginalized, is fascinating. It's amazing. I'm lucky to be able to do it. And again, you know, for us, we're looking at a lot of things in food security and nutrition insecurity. We're looking at a lot around mental behavioral health, particularly as it pertains to Black and brown people who quite often don't get to have those conversations we need to have with those we need to have them with. And so to be able to address those things in real time, to be honest, I feel lucky because I do it free and I get paid. If they're watching, don't try to take how much money I get. Thank you. But what I'm saying is that it's beautiful to be able to do something much like Makiba and you, Janae, and Amari, right? And you can feel the community energy around it. And we're lucky to be in a space where we can do that kind of stuff because not everyone gets that feeling every day. And I get to feel that on a daily. So that's that.
Thank you. Amari, I want to give you a chance to finish saying what you were saying before we start to wrap things up.
I'm going to say that I might be taking collection for my internet service on this call. So I'm going to put a little link in Venmo in the bio. So thank you for being patient with my temporary absence. But, you know, I think we're working on some of the things that Che's talking about, these 7 harms, culture and symbols, criminal justice, transportation, education, housing, wealth, and health. And so those are the 7 harms of racism. I think unapologetically, we're focused on culture, symbols, and personhood, but also working in coalition on the other 6. And, you know, that's the work of Embrace Boston. So, you know, it's not just a monument, but monuments are important to our symbols, our personhood. And when there are no symbols or no culture that is articulated in a city like Boston, where there's only 10 entertainment licenses owned by Black folks, when there's no spaces that you feel like you can go to be with people of a similar culture, and when you are a tourist and you're in central Boston and maybe there's 2 now, you feel like Boston is in a city where there are Black people. And so I think all of us who live here, from here, call this place home, leave Boston and have to defend this place when we all know in the reality it is Boston's a special place, and we're in the middle of a renaissance, and all these things like art and culture matter to ensuring that people feel safe, welcomed, and human in a city and in the places that they live.
Thank you so much. I want to remind everybody that this is just the very first of, I want to say, several screenings happening this month. Next week, we have Set It Off and Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks will be in person at the MFA, so get your tickets directly from them. The Set It Off conversation will be free. A Beautiful Resistance will have a special sneak peek at season 3. We'll also have The Ghost in America's Kitchen and a few other awesome treats for you all. So please keep tuning in and being in community with us. And before we go, I just want to be embracing Amari with all of the love and light for the way that you hold your head high, even when people around the city and the nation make it hard. We know what you do, and we care very much about you, and we protect you and lift you. Makiba, the way you hold us, the way you fund us, the way you make space and open doors for all of us. Thank you. We love you. Che, you already know I love you to the moon and back. We so appreciate the artist in you, the creator in you, the way that you get on stage and light up a room and take people with you. The way you lift artists and give them spaces that they never knew they could be is so important. And the way you go into political offices and med schools and take the community with you is changing lives. So thank you. I embrace all of you. I'm embracing lifting each other.
We embrace you back.
Yeah. Don't try to just get out of that like you don't.
Yeah.
We embrace you as well. We love you as well.
All
Yes.
day long. Absolutely. Thank you, Janae.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll see you again another time. Be loving on yourselves.